knew something was terribly wrong the very second I turned my key in the lock of my own front door. The house was far too quiet. Not the peaceful, comforting kind of quiet I usually looked forward to. There was no television humming in the background, no familiar footsteps upstairs, no gentle clatter from the kitchen. Just a heavy, waiting silence that pressed in on me. When I finally pushed the door open, I saw Linda standing rigidly in the middle of the living room, her arms crossed tight over her chest, her jaw clenched so hard I could actually see the muscle jumping near her ear. Kyle was right beside her, pacing back and forth like a cornered animal, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. They didn't even give me a chance to close the door behind me. Linda shouted, her voice cracking with fury, asking, "What did you do? I almost fainted at the ATM." Kyle then stepped forward, shoving his phone inches from my face, displaying an empty bank account. "Daniel," he demanded, "there's nothing in it. What did you do?" I remember the deliberate calm with which I set my lunchbox down on the hallway table. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm, but my voice remained steady as I explained, "I got a new card, and I moved my paycheck to it." Both of them froze instantly. The color drained from Linda's face with such speed it was almost surreal, like watching ink dissipating water. Kyle's frantic pacing stopped mid-step, his mouth falling open, but no words came out. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound in the entire room was the rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock, the one I had proudly hung there 15 years ago. Then, just as suddenly, everything exploded. "You can't just do that!" Kyle barked, agitated. "We have bills!" Linda quickly corrected him, her voice sharp. "Our bills." But her eyes were fixed on me, searching my face for any sign of weakness, for hesitation, for the man she truly believed she still controlled. I calmly closed the door behind me and quietly stated, "No, they're not our bills." Those words hung in the air like a thick smoke. 3 years earlier, I know I would have backed down. I would have instantly apologized just to maintain some semblance of peace. But something profound had shifted inside me the moment I walked out of the bank that morning. Something that had been buried deep under layers of guilt and compromise had finally come up for air. 3 years ago, I had married Linda because I deeply believed in second chances. I was 52 then, already carrying the heavy scars of a failed marriage and the profound loneliness that inevitably creeps in when your kids are grown and your house suddenly feels too large. Linda possessed a warmth then, or at least she did at first. She made me feel seen, truly seen again. Kyle, her son, came as part of the package. He was 24 at the time, perpetually between jobs, between apartments, between opportunities. Linda had assured me it would only be temporary, just until he gets back on his feet, she'd said, squeezing my hand gently across the dinner table. I had believed her, truly. At first it felt good to help them. Family helps family. That's what my father always used to say. I had worked as a union electrician for over 30 years, putting in early mornings and long shifts, climbing ladders until my knees protested and my back ached like rusted hinges. I wasn't rich, but my income was steady. My paycheck arrived every 2 weeks, like clockwork. The first time Kyle asked to borrow money, it was just $200 for car repairs. "I'll pay you back Friday," he had promised earnestly. Friday came and went, as did many other Fridays. Then it was $300 for a phone bill, $400 for rent on an apartment he never even moved into. Each time, Linda would intercede, saying, "He's trying, Daniel. Don't be so hard on him." I didn't want to be perceived as the villain. Then came the suggestion that utterly changed everything. "It would just be easier," Linda had said one evening while I was rubbing ointment into my lower back, exhausted from work. "If your paycheck went straight into our joint account, I handle the bills anyway. It'll simplify things." I distinctly remember hesitating. Something about it made my stomach tighten with unease. But I was so incredibly tired. tired of arguing, tired of feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. So I signed the papers. From that point on, my paycheck became a ghost. Every time I cautiously inquired about our finances, Linda would simply wave a dismissive hand saying, "It's handled." If I noticed a large withdrawal, she'd claim it was for utilities. If Kyle suddenly had new shoes or another expensive gaming console, it was always attributed to a sale. When I pointed out the rapidly growing credit card balance, she'd quickly remind me that I lived under her roof now too. Her roof. The very first time I heard Kyle casually refer to it as our house, something cold slid down my spine. This was my house, the one I had bought 10 years before I ever even met Linda. The mortgage still had my name on it, alone. I had painted these walls myself. I had replaced a roof after a hailstorm. Every single board in the garage shelves had been cut and meticulously nailed by my own hands. But slowly, subtly, I had been pushed to the very edges of my own life. I cooked when Linda worked late. I drove Kyle to countless interviews that never materialized into actual jobs. I kept quiet when the electric bill mysteriously doubled and the cable package somehow included every sports channel known to man. And every 2 weeks, my paycheck simply disappeared. Last month, the illusion finally cracked. I stopped at the pharmacy to pick up some medication for my back. Nothing fancy, just something to help me sleep through the night. My card was declined. "Must be a glitch," Linda had said later, too quickly. "I'll fix it." But I had seen the bank notification pop up on Kyle's phone that same evening. A significant cash withdrawal at 2:17 a.m. Something inside me hardened irrevocably. So I went to the bank. I requested 18 months of statements. I sat in a stiff plastic chair, meticulously reading every single line. And what I found made the blood roar in my ears. Cash advances, sports bars, online betting sites, a beach vacation in Destin that I was never invited to, electronic stores, jewelry. A staggering $38,700, simply gone. When I asked Maya, the kind bank representative, if I could open a new account, one that only I controlled, she didn't look surprised in the slightest. She just nodded knowingly and said, "Of course." Now, here I stood in my own living room, facing the inevitable fallout. Kyle's voice cut sharply through my thoughts. "You're going to ruin us, Daniel." "No," I replied, meeting his eyes steadily. "I'm just done funding you." Linda's hands trembled visibly. "You had no right to do this without talking to me." I let out a slow, deliberate breath. "For 3 years," I said, "I didn't have a right to my own paycheck." Silence swallowed the room once more, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel afraid of it. That silence in the living room, however, didn't last long. It never does when money is involved. Kyle was the first to recover. He ran a hand through his hair, starting to pace again, his sneakers squeaking against the hardwood floor I'd installed myself. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath. "You don't just change everything overnight." Linda's voice was softer, but it carried far more weight. "Daniel," she said carefully, as if I were a fragile piece of glass. "We built a system. You can't just dismantle it because you're upset." "Upset?" The word almost made me laugh out loud. "I'm not upset," I clarified. "I'm finished." Linda flinched at that. Not because I had raised my voice, I hadn't, but because there was no heat in my tone, just a chilling certainty. Kyle stopped pacing and pointed an accusing finger at me. "You live here too. You know, you eat the food, you use the lights." "You think that stuff pays for itself?" I looked at him for a long moment, observing the faint stubble on his chin, the expensive smartwatch on his wrist, the shoes that likely cost more than the work boots I'd worn for 10 years on job sites. "This house was paid for before you ever moved in," I said evenly. "The lights were on long before you knew the address." Linda quickly stepped between us, her tone shifting. "Stop," she snapped at Kyle, then turned back to me, trying a different tack.
"This isn't about ownership. It's about partnership. Marriage means sharing."
Marriage. The word used to mean something sacred to me. It used to mean trust. I walked past both of them and into the kitchen. I needed water. My throat felt incredibly dry, like I'd been breathing dust all day. They followed me. Of course they did. "You blindsided us," Linda said, leaning against the counter. "If you were unhappy, you should have talked to me." I turned slowly, glass in hand.
"I did talk to you," I corrected her.
Every time I asked about the credit cards, every time I asked why our savings kept shrinking, every time I asked why Kyle was withdrawing cash at 2 in the morning, Kyle's jaw tightened defensively. "You were spying on me." "It's my account," I replied. Linda's face paled slightly at that single possessive word, my. For 3 years, that word had been systematically replaced with ours, our account, our expenses, our decisions. But the reality had always been far simpler. My paycheck, my house, my name on the mortgage. The truth is, this insidious transfer of control didn't happen all at once. It never does. It happens in small, seemingly harmless compromises. The first compromise was agreeing to the joint account. The second was letting Linda handle all the bills. The third was trusting explanations that never quite added up. I vividly remembered the night Kyle came home with that oversized television, 80 inches of unnecessary brightness dominating my living room wall. It was a clearance deal, he'd said. 2 weeks later, I saw the exorbitant charge. Then there was the vacation. Linda had told me she needed a break with Kyle. "Just mother and son time," she'd said gently. "You've been working so much, you deserve rest too." So I stayed home and worked overtime. They posted pictures from the beach, and I later saw the transactions. Resort booking, rental car, restaurant charges. When I finally confronted Linda about it, she turned it around so smoothly it almost impressed me. "You make me feel like I'm stealing from you," she'd said, tears welling in her eyes. "Do you even trust me?" Back then, the guilt had been unbearable. Now, the chilling clarity was far worse. Kyle slammed his palm against the kitchen table, the sudden noise jolting me back to the present. "So, what now?" he demanded. "You're just going to keep everything to yourself?" "Yes." The word came easier than I expected. Linda's eyes filled with tears again, but I'd learned to recognize the distinct difference between genuine hurt and pure panic. This was panic. "We have debt," she said urgently. "You know that. Credit cards, medical bills, Kyle's car payment. You think those disappear just because you got the new card?" "I didn't create those debts," I stated. "We're family." She whispered that word again. Family. I thought about my father, working double shifts at the steel plant. About my mother, stretching every single dollar until it squealed. They never used that word as a weapon. For them, family meant protection, not extraction. "I'm not abandoning you," I said quietly. "I'm separating my income from your spending." Kyle scoffed derisively. "That's the same thing." "No," I replied firmly. "It's accountability." The word hit harder than I intended. Kyle's eyes flickered, momentarily stunned. "You think I don't want to work?" he shot back, defensive. "You think this is easy for me?" "I think," I said slowly, deliberately, "that for 3 years you've had access to money you didn't earn." Linda stepped closer, lowering her voice, trying to sound conciliatory. "Daniel, we were planning to tell you." "Tell me what?" I pressed. "That things got out of control." "Out of control?" I repeated, the incredulity evident in my voice. As if it were the weather, as if debt simply blew in like a storm. "How much?" I asked, my gaze sweeping between them. Neither of them answered immediately. "How much?" I repeated, my voice now insistent. Kyle looked at Linda, who in turn looked at the floor, avoiding my gaze. "About 12,000, she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I let the number settle, the weight of it pressing down. $12,000 in credit card debt, on top of the $38,000 already drained from my account. "And you thought the solution," I said slowly, making sure each word was clearly enunciated, "was to keep using my paycheck?" Linda's composure finally cracked. "We thought you'd help us." I set the glass down carefully on the counter. "I have been helping you," I said, my voice low, "for 3 years." The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in, the air growing heavy with unspoken truths. Kyle's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at it, then quickly locked the screen, his face unreadable. "You don't understand," he muttered. "Then help me understand," I challenged. But he didn't. Instead, he grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair and stormed toward the door. "This isn't over," he shouted as he left, the door slamming shut behind him, rattling the very foundations of the house. Linda stood there trembling, her face pale. "You're going to tear this family apart," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in what felt like ages, and felt something entirely unexpected. Not anger, not hatred, just a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. "This family was already cracked," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I just stopped pretending I didn't see it. And as the echoing slam of the front door faded into the heavy quiet of the house, I realized something else. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was, unmistakably, the beginning of the reckoning. Kyle didn't come home until well after midnight. I knew because I was still awake, unable to sleep. I sat alone in the dark living room, with only the small lamp by my recliner turned on, its yellow light softly illuminating my boots. I hadn't turned the television on. I didn't want any noise. I just wanted to think, to process everything. When the front door finally creaked open, I didn't move a muscle. Kyle stepped inside quietly, likely expecting the house to be fast asleep. He smelled faintly of stale beer and something cloyingly sugary. Cheap cologne layered over a string of poor decisions. He froze dead in his tracks when he saw me. "You waiting up to lecture me?" he asked defensively, before I'd even spoken a word. "No," I said calmly. "I'm waiting for you to tell me the truth." He shifted his weight uncomfortably, his eyes flicking toward the stairs where Linda's shadow lingered at the top landing. She'd been listening too, I realized. "What truth?" he muttered, trying to feign ignorance. I reached beside the recliner and lifted the folder I'd brought home from the bank. The edges were already bent and softened from being opened and reopened countless times all afternoon. "This one?" I asked, placing it deliberately on the coffee table between us. Kyle stared at it as if it might explode at any second. "What is that?" 18 months of statements, I replied. He swallowed hard. Linda slowly began to descend the stairs. She didn't rush, she didn't shout, but her face had that tight, controlled look she wore when she knew something had irrevocably slipped beyond her grasp. "You went through our finances?" she asked softly, her voice strained. "No," I corrected gently. "I went through mine." I opened the folder and slid the top few pages toward Kyle. "Go ahead," I said, my voice neutral. "Read them." He didn't sit. He didn't even bend down. He just stared at the numbers from a safe distance, as if proximity alone would force an admission of guilt. "I don't have to justify every transaction to you," he said finally, his voice a strained whisper. "You don't," I agreed calmly. "But when those transactions come out of my paycheck, I do." Linda stepped forward and picked up the pages instead. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held them. I watched her eyes move slowly down the columns. Cash withdrawal, $400. Sports bar, $276. Online betting platform, $650. Electronics store, $1,198. Vacation rental, $2,450. Her breathing changed, becoming shallow and rapid. "You're making this look worse than it is," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Am I?" I asked, my gaze unwavering. Kyle abruptly grabbed the pages from her hands, his patience completely gone. "You don't get it," he snapped. "That betting stuff, I was trying to flip money, make more, help out." "With whose money?" I asked, cutting him off. He didn't answer. The thing about numbers, I realized, is they don't shout. They don't exaggerate. They just sit there in black ink, patient and undeniable. $38,700. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a rough patch. That was a clearly established pattern. Linda slowly sank onto the edge of the couch, defeated. "We meant to tell you," she said, her voice thin and reedy. "But every month we thought we could catch up." "Catch up to what?" I pressed. Kyle started pacing again, but this time it wasn't anger driving him. It was pure, unadulterated fear. "There were some losses," he admitted reluctantly. "But if one bet had hit, just one big one, we could have wiped out the debt." I stared at him, unable to comprehend. "You gambled my paycheck," I said quietly, the weight of the realization settling on me. "It wasn't like that," he protested weakly. "It was exactly like that," Linda interjected, shooting him a furious look. "I told you this would happen." "Oh, so now it's my fault," Kyle fired back, his voice rising. The argument ignited between them so quickly it almost felt rehearsed, a familiar dance of blame. "You're the one who kept increasing the limit," Linda accused. "You said we needed more breathing room. You said Daniel wouldn't notice." That last sentence hung heavy in the air between the three of us. They both realized what they'd said at the exact same moment. My chest tightened, but not in the way it used to. Not with humiliation, not with shame. This time, it was with chilling clarity. "So you knew," I stated, my voice flat. Linda's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with panic. "That's not what I meant." "You knew?" I repeated, my gaze locked on hers. Silence. Kyle ran both hands through his hair in frustration. "It wasn't personal," he insisted. I almost laughed at the absurdity. "It's very personal," I corrected him, my voice firm. "It's my work, my hours, my back. For 32 long years, I'd climbed ladders in the scorching heat and the bitter cold. I'd crawled through attics with insulation sticking to my skin, eaten lunch in a cramped truck cab during snowstorms. I'd come home utterly exhausted, but proud that the light stayed on because of me, because of my effort. And for 3 years, my dedication, my hard work, had been treated like a mere subscription service." Linda stood up slowly, defeated. "What do you want us to say?" "The truth," I replied. Kyle exhaled sharply, conceding. "Fine. We needed the money. I messed up. I thought I could fix it before you found out." "You didn't fix it," I said. "You doubled it." He looked down at his feet, unable to meet my gaze. "And you?" I said, turning my attention to Linda. "You watched." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time I saw something else behind them, a flicker of cold calculation. "We were trying to protect you," she said, attempting to justify herself. "From what?" I asked. "From stress, from worrying. You've had health issues." "My health issues," I countered, the words landing harder than anything else I'd said, "are because I've been carrying everyone else." That statement seemed to genuinely shake Linda for a moment. Kyle broke the tense silence first. "So what now? You think cutting off your paycheck solves this?" "It solves one thing," I said. "It stops the bleeding." "And the rest?" Linda asked, her voice small. The rest is yours, I told them. Kyle stared at me like I'd just announced a death sentence. You're going to let us drown. I'm not pushing you into the water, I replied, my voice unwavering. I'm stepping out of it. The house fell into such a profound quiet again that I could distinctly hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Linda folded her arms across her chest, retreating into a familiar defensiveness. You're acting like we robbed you. You did, I stated, the word feeling heavy and irrefutable in the silent room. Kyle's eyes flashed with anger.
Be careful with that word. Why? I asked, challenging him directly. Because it's accurate.
He stepped toward me, his jaw clenched, but Linda quickly grabbed his arm. Stop, she hissed. We stood there, the three of us, locked in a tense standoff built on years of silence and unspoken resentments. Finally, I picked up the folder and closed it with a definitive snap. Monday, I announced, was the last time my paycheck funded this house. Linda swallowed hard. And after that? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked slowly around the room, taking in the oversized television, the expensive speakers, the framed photos from vacations I hadn't been invited to. After that, I said quietly, my gaze meeting hers, we figure out who can actually afford to live here. Kyle's face went utterly pale. For the very first time, he understood the true gravity of what I was saying. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, and he had just irrevocably lost his. The next morning felt like the aftermath of a devastating storm. Not the kind that leaves broken windows and downed trees, but the kind that leaves the air heavy, thick with everything that hasn't yet fallen, with palpable tension. Linda didn't make coffee. Kyle didn't come downstairs from his room. I brewed my own and sat alone at the kitchen table, silently staring at the sunlight slowly creeping across the floorboards. It struck me then how long it had been since I'd sat there in such profound silence without someone immediately asking me for something. Around 10 o'clock, Kyle finally emerged. He looked rough, dark circles under his eyes, his jaw unshaven. He didn't greet me, didn't acknowledge me. He just poured himself some coffee and leaned against the counter, avoiding my gaze. I called the bank, he muttered, his voice hoarse. I nodded slowly. I figured you would. They said the deposit went through, he continued. Just not to the old account. That's right, I confirmed. He looked at me, trying to see if I would crack, if I would show any sign of giving in. I didn't. Linda joined us a few minutes later, dressed but still pale, her face drawn. She avoided eye contact at first, then finally, bravely, faced me. We need to talk like adults, she said, her voice strained. I've been ready, I told her. She sat down across from me at the table. Kyle remained standing, arms crossed, but I knew he was listening intently to every word. Okay, she began carefully, choosing her words. The situation is worse than we thought. I waited patiently, giving her space to continue. The total debt, including the second card, is closer to 15,000. I didn't react, not outwardly, not a single muscle twitched. And if we don't make the minimum payments this month, she added, her voice dropping, we'll default. I let that word hang in the air for a deliberate moment. You will default, I corrected her calmly, making sure the distinction was clear. Linda's lips pressed into a thin, angry line. You're being cruel. No, I said evenly, meeting her gaze. I'm being accurate. Kyle pushed off the counter, his frustration boiling over. You think this is funny? I think it's predictable, I replied. He stared at me, then lashed out. You're not perfect, he shot back. You've made bad calls too. Name one that cost me $15,000, I challenged. Silence. Linda reached across the table, her hand resting briefly on my arm. Daniel, please. We can work this out. You don't have to cut us off completely. I'm not cutting you off, I said, removing my arm gently. I'm separating finances. That's the same thing, she insisted, exasperated. No, I replied firmly. It's boundaries. That word again. It seemed to make them both incredibly uncomfortable. Kyle started pacing, the way he always did when he felt cornered, a nervous habit. So, what's your master plan? He sneered. You keep your money, we magically fix ours? No magic, I said. Just responsibility. Linda's voice sharpened, resentment creeping in. You think we're irresponsible? I met her eyes directly. Yes. The truth landed between us like a dropped plate, sharp and shattering. She recoiled slightly, stung by my bluntness. After everything we've been through? What we've been through, I clarified, is 3 years of you and Kyle spending money you didn't earn. Kyle scoffed as if he had actually been wronged. I've worked part-time for 6 months. He didn't deny the rest of my statement. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of unyielding resolve. You have 30 days, I said calmly. Both of them froze instantly. 30 days for what? Linda asked, her voice laced with dread. To decide, I explained. Decide what? She pressed. If we want to stay here. Kyle's expression shifted dramatically from anger to disbelief, his face draining of color. This is our home. No, I said quietly, correcting him. It's mine. Linda stood up abruptly, a fresh wave of fury washing over her. How dare you? How dare I? I questioned, standing up as well, meeting her indignant gaze. What state of fact? You're threatening to throw your wife out. I'm offering terms, I clarified. Kyle laughed bitterly, a hollow, mirthless sound. Terms? What is this, a business deal? Yes, I confirmed, the single word stuttering them both into stunned silence. If you stay, I continued, my voice firm and unwavering. You pay $800 a month in rent, combined. You cover your own food, your own utilities usage, and you will not have access to my accounts. Kyle's jaw dropped open in disbelief. Rent? He shouted. You heard me, I replied. We are family, he protested, almost pleading. Then act like it, I countered. Linda's eyes filled with tears again, but they weren't the manipulative kind this time. They were raw, genuine tears of despair. You charge your own wife? She whispered, the accusation heavy in the air. I'd expect my wife not to drain my paycheck in secret, I stated. That cut deep, visibly so. She sank back into her chair, defeated. And if we can't? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Then you find another place, I told them. Kyle exploded again. You can't just kick us out! I'm not kicking you out, I said, the distinction important to me. I'm ending the subsidy. The difference mattered. They didn't like that it mattered. Linda looked at me as if she was seeing a complete stranger, someone she'd never known. Who are you? She asked, her voice small. I'm the man who finally checked his bank statements, I replied. The room went silent again, a heavy, suffocating silence. I stood up slowly, picked up the folder, and closed it with a sense of finality. You have 30 days, I repeated, my voice calm. I'll put it in writing. Kyle's fist clenched tightly by his side. You're going to regret this. I paused at the doorway, turning to face them one last time. I regretted the last 3 years, I said. I'm done regretting. I walked out into the garage and deliberately shut the door behind me. For a moment, I just stood there, surrounded by the familiar smells of motor oil and sawdust. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from a profound sense of release. I'd spent 3 long years swallowing frustration, avoiding confrontation at all costs. Now it was out, all of it, and there was no taking it back. Behind the garage door, I could hear muffled arguing, Kyle's voice rising in anger, Linda's breaking in despair. I didn't intervene. Instead, I grabbed a scrap piece of wood from the workbench and began sanding it down. Slow, steady strokes. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control over something again. And control, I realized, was the very thing they'd feared losing the most. The first week after the ultimatum felt like living inside a pressure cooker. No one slammed doors anymore. No one shouted. Instead, everything was quiet in a way that felt rehearsed, polite, calculated. Linda stopped cooking for me. Kyle stopped speaking to me altogether, completely shutting me out. I didn't react to their passive aggression. I went to work every morning at 6 o'clock, came home around 4 o'clock, and made my own dinner if nothing was on the stove. I bought groceries separately, and yes, I even labeled a shelf in the refrigerator with a piece of masking tape that simply said Daniel. It felt ridiculous the first time I did it, but it also felt absolutely necessary. 3 days into the week, Kyle tried his fast strategy. He caught me in the driveway while I was unloading a heavy bag of cement from my truck. "Look," he said, his voice softer than usual, a clear attempt at manipulation. Maybe we started off on the wrong foot. I kept lifting the cement bag, not missing a beat. "I don't think we started on the wrong foot," I replied. "I think we walked too far in the wrong direction." He exhaled sharply, frustrated. "I've been applying for jobs." "That's good," I acknowledged. "That's it?" he pressed. "What do you want, a parade?" His jaw tightened in anger. "You think this is easy for me?" "No," I said, looking him in the eye. "I think it's overdue." He stared at me for a moment longer, clearly recalculating, then changed tactics. "Linda's not sleeping," he said quietly, trying to elicit sympathy. "She's scared." I set the cement bag down and looked directly at him. Scared of what? Losing everything. I wiped the dust from my hands, my voice flat. She didn't seem scared when the resort charges came through. That effectively ended the conversation. The second week brought the second strategy, guilt. Linda knocked softly on my bedroom door one night. "Can we talk?" I hesitated before opening it, bracing myself. She stood there without makeup, her face thinner somehow, like stress had carved away a layer. "I've been thinking," she began, sitting tentatively at the edge of the bed. "Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I relied on you too much." "Maybe," I said carefully, acknowledging her words but offering no immediate absolution. She reached for my hand, a familiar gesture. "We're married, Daniel. Marriage isn't supposed to be transactional." "It's not," I agreed, pulling my hand back gently. "But it's not supposed to be one-sided either." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't realize it got this bad." "You knew the numbers," I reminded her softly. "I didn't look at them like that," she insisted. "How did you look at them?" I asked. "At survival," she replied. I studied her face intently. "For who?" I pressed. She didn't answer that. Instead, she tried something subtler, a fresh attempt at negotiation. "What if we compromise?" she suggested. "You keep your paycheck, but you help with the credit cards, just until we catch up." There it was, not an apology, but a negotiation disguised as one. "No," I said simply, definitively. Her eyes flashed, heart quickly morphing into frustration. "You're being rigid." "I'm being consistent," I corrected her. She stood abruptly, unable to contain her anger. "You're punishing us." "No," I said again, my voice unwavering. "I'm stopping." She left the room without another word, the click of the door echoing her defeat. The third week brought a different tactic, anger. Kyle came home one evening, slammed the front door shut, and threw his jacket onto the couch with unnecessary force. "You're unbelievable," he snapped. I was in the kitchen, calmly slicing vegetables. "What happened?" I asked, not looking up. "They cut one of my cards," he fumed. "Consequences," I stated simply. "You did this?" he demanded, stepping closer, his voice full of accusation. "I didn't apply for it," I replied, still focused on my task. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he scoffed. "I think I'm tired," I admitted. He laughed bitterly, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "You're going to end up alone." That one hit me, but not in the way he intended. Not because I feared being alone, but because I'd already felt profoundly alone in a house full of people. "I've been alone for 3 years," I said quietly, the truth hanging in the air. He didn't know what to do with that, a response he hadn't anticipated. By week 4, the house felt subtly different, less hostile, more resigned, as if the air itself was giving up the fight. Boxes started appearing in Kyle's room. I noticed the oversized television was gone one afternoon, the one he'd bought with clear steel money. He'd sold it. Linda began coming home later from work, actively avoiding me, avoiding the stark reality we were facing. On the 27th day, I found her sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a notepad filled with columns of numbers. "We can't afford this house," she said flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. "You couldn't afford it," I replied, correcting her subtle deflection. She didn't argue. "I found a small apartment," she added quietly. 2 bedrooms. It's not ideal." "No," I agreed. "It's realistic." Her eyes filled with tears again, but there was something different in them this time. Acceptance. "You're really not going to change your mind?" she asked, a final, faint hope in her voice. "No," I confirmed. She nodded slowly, defeat etched on her face. On the 30th day, Kyle loaded the very last box into his car. He didn't look at me, couldn't meet my gaze. Linda lingered in the doorway, a ghost of her former self. "This didn't have to end like this," she said, her voice small. "It didn't have to start like that either," I replied, my voice steady. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, finding no words. "I hope you're happy," she whispered, a hint of bitterness in her tone. I thought about that for a moment, weighing the word. "Not yet," I said honestly, "but I'm honest." She turned and walked toward the car, her shoulders slumped. I stood alone in the driveway as they pulled away. No screaming, no dramatic goodbyes, just a quiet sound of tires on asphalt. And then, silence. Real silence. For the first time in years, the house felt like mine again. Not simply because they were gone, but because I hadn't given myself away to keep them there. The first night alone in the house felt unfamiliar. Not painful, not triumphant, just unfamiliar. I stood in the living room after the sun had fully set, listening intently to the profound quiet. No television blasting sports commentary, no muffled arguments behind closed doors, no footsteps pacing the hallway at midnight. Just the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the old clock. I didn't realize how truly loud the house had been until it wasn't. I slept in my own bed without locking the bedroom door for the first time in years. That surprised me deeply. I hadn't even consciously known I'd been doing that for so long. The next morning, I made coffee and carried it out to the front porch. The early light filtered softly through the old oak tree in the yard, casting moving shadows across the dew-kissed grass. The yard needed trimming, I noticed. The roses along the fence were overgrown, wild. I'd let so many things slide, not just the finances, but everything. When you're busy holding a failing structure together, you don't always notice the foundation cracking beneath your feet. I spent that entire Saturday cleaning, not because I had to, not out of obligation, but because I genuinely wanted to. I rearranged the living room, took down the oversized wall mount where the television had been, and patched the gaping holes in the drywall. I opened the windows wide and let fresh air flood in, even though it was still quite cool outside. By afternoon, the house felt lighter, cleaner, freer. By evening, I felt lighter too. On Sunday, I drove to the hardware store and bought new light fixtures for the kitchen. The old ones had flickered for months, and every time I mentioned it, Linda had always said it wasn't a priority. Funny how priorities shift when the debit card stops working. I didn't hear from either of them that first week. Not a call, not a text. I didn't know whether to be relieved or insulted by their silence. Then, on the 8th day, my phone buzzed with a notification. Linda. I stared at her name on the screen for a long moment, my heart doing a strange little flutter before I finally answered. Hello? Her voice was softer than usual, smaller, almost timid. Daniel, can we talk? We're talking, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. There was a brief pause on her end. We moved in yesterday, she said. It's tight. I'm sure, I acknowledged, my voice flat. Kyle's voice murmured faintly in the background, too distant to make out actual words. I've been thinking, she continued, her voice gaining a slight tremor. Maybe we handled things badly. Maybe... She exhaled sharply, a sound of frustration. I'm not calling to argue. Then why are you calling? I asked, getting straight to the point. Silence. Finally, she brought herself to say it. We're short on the security deposit. I closed my eyes briefly, bracing myself. How short? $2,000. I let that number sit there between us, heavy and unspoken. You said you weren't calling about money, I reminded her. I'm not, she said quickly, a hint of desperation in her voice. I'm asking for help. That's the same thing, I corrected, my voice firm. Her breathing grew heavier, more labored. I thought, after everything, you might reconsider. Reconsider what? I pressed. The hard line. I leaned back in my porch chair, looking out at my now well-maintained yard, the fresh air cool against my face. There it was again. Not an apology, just another negotiation. I'm not your credit line, I said calmly, stating the undeniable truth. Her voice cracked, a desperate plea. You're my husband. I was, I replied, the past tense a stark reality. But you treated me like an ATM. The silence that followed was long and heavy, filled with all the unspoken words of our failed marriage. Then she whispered, almost to herself, so that's it then. She didn't argue this time. She didn't cry. She just said, her voice filled with a profound sense of disbelief, I didn't think you'd actually follow through. I did, I affirmed. She hung up without another word. I sat there for a while after the call ended, reflecting. There's a strange, unique kind of grief that comes with choosing yourself. It doesn't look like sorrow, not in the traditional sense. It looks more like space, like standing alone in an empty room you once shared intimately with someone else. Later that week, I received a message from an unknown number. It was Kyle. I almost deleted it without even reading it, an old habit of self-preservation. Instead, curiosity piqued. I opened it. I get it now, he wrote. I screwed up. I thought I could fix it before it blew up. I was wrong. That surprised me, genuinely. Then a second message came almost immediately after. Any chance you'd co-sign something for me? Just until I get back on my feet. I didn't respond. Instead, I simply blocked the number. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of a clear, unshakable clarity. On Friday evening, I found myself standing in a garage, looking at my old fishing rods I hadn't touched in years. I used to go out to the lake every summer, a cherished tradition. I'd stopped because there was always a bill to discuss, always tension to manage, always someone else's crisis to solve, always my paycheck to worry about. I loaded the rods into the truck the next morning and drove to the familiar water. The lake was quiet, incredibly peaceful. The air smelled clean, fresh. I cast the line out and sat back, feeling the slow, gentle rhythm of the world again. No one needed anything from me. No one was watching my bank balance. No one was calculating my paycheck before I even earned it. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't funding someone else's chaos. I was just breathing. And somewhere between the still water, in the gentle, rhythmic pool of the current, I realized something that had taken me far too long to understand. Freedom doesn't feel loud. It feels steady. And steady, I had finally become. 6 months passed before Linda knocked on my door again. By then, the house no longer felt like an echo of what had been. It felt lived in again, intentional, truly mine. I'd repainted the living room a warm, inviting gray, replaced the old, heavy curtains with simple white ones that let in the soft morning light. The garden was trimmed, neat. The roses were blooming beautifully, just the way they used to before everything got so loud and complicated. I'd even joined a Saturday morning coffee group at the hardware store, started fishing twice a month, and finally fixed the small crack in the driveway that I'd been stepping over for years without ever addressing. It's funny what you start to notice when your life isn't consumed by someone else's constant urgency. When the knock came, I was sanding down a new bookshelf in the garage. I knew it was her before I even opened the door. There's a particular way someone knocks when they still believe deep down that they belong. Linda stood on the porch, looking thinner than I remembered. No expensive handbag, no sharp makeup, just jeans, a worn sweater, and eyes that looked truly tired in a way I hadn't seen before. "Hi," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "Hi," I replied, equally unsure of the protocol. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us sure what the correct distance was anymore, how close or far apart we should be. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice a small request. I hesitated for a beat, then stepped aside, opening the door wider. She walked slowly into the living room, looking around almost like she was visiting a house she used to know, a place that was once familiar, but now subtly alien. "You changed it," she murmured, observing the new paint and curtains. "I needed to," I said simply. She nodded, understanding. We sat across from each other on the same couch where so many arguments had unraveled, so many painful truths had been avoided. Kyle wasn't with her. "That's intentional," she said, noticing my glance toward the door. "We're not together anymore." I waited, giving her space to continue. "He left 2 months ago," she continued, her voice quiet. "The debt was worse than I thought. Gambling, personal loans. I didn't know about half of it." I didn't say anything, not needing to, because I had known, or at least I'd suspected, a great deal. "He used me the same way we used you," she said quietly, finally admitting the truth. That word again. Used. The room felt smaller, the air thick with the uncomfortable reality of it. "I hit rock bottom," she admitted, her voice raw. "And for the first time, I truly understood what you meant." I studied her face carefully. There was no performance in it this time, no subtle strategy at play, just pure, unadulterated exhaustion. "I'm not here to ask for money," she added quickly, anticipating my thought. "I'm working 2 jobs. I'm paying down what I can." I nodded once, a silent acknowledgement. "I'm here because I owe you something," she said, her gaze firm. "What's that?" I asked. She swallowed hard, gathering her courage. "An apology." The word hovered between us, fragile and long-awaited. I knew the numbers were bad, she said, her voice strained. I knew Kyle was spending recklessly. I let it happen because I was afraid of confrontation, afraid of losing him, afraid of being alone again. She looked up at me, tears in her eyes, but not falling. I chose the easier path. I chose to keep using your paycheck instead of forcing him to face reality. I didn't interrupt, letting her speak her truth fully. I justified it by telling myself we were married, that it was shared money, that you were strong enough to carry it. Her voice cracked with emotion. I didn't ask if you should. That landed with a heavy impact, reverberating in the silence. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked softly on the wall, the only sound. I can't undo it, she continued, her voice laced with regret. I can't give you back the peace I stole, but I needed you to know that I see it now. I really see it. I leaned back, taking in the full weight of what she'd said, the enormity of her confession. Apologies are complicated things. They don't erase the past. They don't refund lost time or money. They don't rewind time to undo what's been done. They simply acknowledge. I appreciate that, I said carefully, my voice measured. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I don't expect forgiveness today, she added, her voice stronger now. I just didn't want the last thing between us to be anger. I considered that for a moment. You understand, I said slowly, testing the waters, why I couldn't help you again. Yes, she replied. You understand why I couldn't compromise. Yes, she affirmed. You understand that boundaries aren't cruelty. She nodded, a genuine sense of understanding on her face. I do now. That was the closest thing to closure I'd had in months, perhaps ever. We talked for nearly an hour after that. Not about money, not about blame, but just about life. Her work, the small apartment she was renting, the harsh reality of rebuilding at 52. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door, her hand on the frame. You look lighter, she said quietly, observing me. I am, I confirmed, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. She smiled faintly in return. I hope you find someone who appreciates that. I didn't respond, because appreciation wasn't what I'd been searching for. Self-respect was. After she left, I stood by the window and watched her walk down the driveway, a figure now solitary. Not with bitterness, not with longing, just with a profound sense of understanding. Some relationships, I realized, aren't meant to survive the truth. But some people can profoundly grow because of it. That evening, I sat on the porch again, coffee in hand, watching the sky fade into brilliant shades of orange and violet. I thought about the man I had been 3 years ago, the one who meticulously avoided conflict, the one who mistakenly equated sacrifice with true love, the one who deeply believed that peace simply meant silence. That version of me would have handed over the paycheck without question. He would have signed the cosign. He would have swallowed the bitter resentment whole and mistakenly called it compromise. But that man isn't sitting here anymore. This man, the one I've become, learned something far harder, far more vital. He learned that self-respect sometimes costs you comfort, deeply. He learned that love without clear, firm boundaries inevitably becomes exploitation. And he learned that saying no can, in fact, be the most honest and necessary thing you ever say. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt guilty for protecting what you worked your entire life to build, your paycheck, your home, your precious peace, I want you to hear this clearly and unequivocally. Boundaries aren't betrayal. They are, at their very core, survival. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. I don't know whether Linda and I will ever truly be friends or simply two people who share the profound, difficult lesson. But I know this with absolute certainty. Today, I live in my own house. Today, I earn my own money. Today, I don't apologize for simply existing. And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to draw a line you were afraid to draw, I want to hear about it.
Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what line you had to draw in your own life, what difficult choice you had to make. We share stories like this every day because sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that ultimately set us free. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let's keep walking this road together towards clarity and self-respect.